We are back. We are so back with another reading rack up. We are back with another reading wrap up, and this time we are talking about all of the books that I read in the month of August. I feel as though I had quite a good reading month, if I do say so myself, for the month of August. I don't know if that was due to the fun TBR pulling or maybe the book club books that were pulled this past month. Actually, one of them not so much, but the other one that I read, I'll count. I've got my stack here of all of the books that I read in the month of August. I read 7 books total. 2 of those were romance, 2 were fantasy, 2 were mystery thriller, and then 1 was a YA mystery. I wanted to kind of set that more over to the side from the normal mystery thriller genre because I feel as though that's different from your typical thriller. That's why I kind of separated it out that way. But those are the genres that I read this month. I would say I've got some pretty darn high ratings for a lot of these books. So happy, so exciting, so fun, which means I had a really, really good reading month. I mean, obviously I read 7 books. Where I work full time, I would say 7 books is quite the feat, and I'm very proud of myself for getting through almost my entire TBR that I pulled for the month of August, including the book club books. Let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the books that I read. The only book that I didn't get to from my August TBR, I did not read the second book in the Shatter Me series. I think that one's called Unravel Me. I didn't make it to that one, and then I didn't quite get to Divine Rivals by the end of the month, but I don't even meet to talk about that book and another book that I did finish until this coming week. So let's go ahead and jump into the books that I read for August. All right, so with an okay start, we have The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I love the Housemaid series just as a whole. I would say out of the 3 books in the series, this was my least favorite. I feel really bad saying that because I'm a big Frida fan, at least so far. A lot of what I read that is Frida McFadden, I have absolutely loved. I have eaten up. I have not guessed any of the twists that she throws into her books thus far until this one. I had a really, really strong inkling about one of the things that does happen in this book that I would say is one of your big major twists. And I think that's what knocked down my star rating for this book. Now, my star rating is still a good rating. It's still a really great rating, and I still really did enjoy this book. It kept me engaged the entire time. It's very fast paced, which doesn't surprise me at all with it being a Frida McFadden book. Out of the whole series, I would say the second book still reigns as my favorite. I personally loved the second book so much, and then the first you obviously cannot go wrong with. It is incredible as well. That's obviously the book that really got me into Frida McFadden, so I would still recommend probably, maybe, reading this book. If you read the first 2 and you really enjoyed them, go ahead and read this one as well. It follows along the same main character in this book as the first 2. So you're following Millie like 10 years down the road since book 2. She's got a family now. The family is more involved in this book. She's basically moved to a new home with her family, and she's got some really weird, creepy neighbors, and that's kind of where the book starts. So I'll leave it at that for you to decide if you want to pick up this third book here. I wouldn't say that you have to read the first or the second book to read the third book, but I would recommend it just because if you don't, it probably, I would think it wouldn't be as enjoyable to read if you didn't already know about the characters, at least the main character. I ended up giving this book a 3.75 stars. I think that is still a very good rating. I think I just was a little smidgy tiny bit disappointed because I have such high expectations for Frida McFadden. Otherwise, still really enjoyed it, and I would still recommend it. The next book that I read is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Oh my gosh, I don't know why it took me so long to pick this book up to read. I guess it came to the point that I needed to pull it on a blindly picking my TBR video, but here we are. I finally read it, and I will say I'm going to for sure be continuing this series. I think I was just a little bit wary because I had started The Five Survive by Holly Jackson, and I'll be honest, I was not enjoying that book from the start. I don't know if I just wasn't in the mood for that book at the time that I started it, but I ended up DNFing it. That hurts. That hurts to say because I've heard good things about it. It just wasn't my cup of tea. Maybe I'll pick it up in the future if you guys would recommend that I pick it back up. I probably made it like 15 to 20% of the way through. If I make it about that far into a book and I'm just not enjoying it, that is typically where I'll go ahead and at least soft DNF it. So maybe I would say The Five Survive is a soft DNF more than like I'm just never gonna pick it up again. Especially if you guys say, Brie, listen, you need to pick it back up. It gets a lot better after like the first 20%. Okay, understood. I will keep that in my brain, my arsenal. But A Good Girl's Guide to Murder will for sure be reading the rest of the series. I loved this book so much. I'm like honestly shocked because with YA books, you never know if it's going to be way too cringy or if you're going to guess everything that happens at the very start, but that definitely was not the case, at least for me. I did not guess the twist. Throughout the entire time that I was reading it though, I kept pinning it on a different person. You follow Pip throughout her journey trying to write this really big paper / project for school. They call it like a capstone project or something like that. You can write whatever you want for said project. She bases her project on a murder / disappearance that happens in her town a few years prior and is trying to prove the case is incorrect. They got it all wrong. They pinned the wrong person, and so she's trying to nail down what happened. And it's really, really interesting because she interviews a lot of different people. She ends up gaining a really close friend that you end up falling in love with. I couldn't put it down. It was so extremely fast paced. I highly recommend this if you need even just a good, like, fun read. This one was fantastic. Chapters are so short. This one was also really interesting to listen to via audiobook because anytime that she had an interview with anyone or spoke with anyone over the phone, it sounded like a recording or a phone conversation. It was so cool. Normally with audiobooks, you don't really get that. I ended up giving this book a 4.5 stars. I think the only thing that kept me from giving it a full 5 stars is just the fact that, I don't know, it is a YA. There were some cringy moments in it. Obviously things aren't like totally wrapped up at the end because it is a series, which I totally understand, but I will be continuing the series for sure. The next book that I read is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This has been sitting on my TBR for way too long. Way too long. How the heck did I not pick this book up before now? Like I'm shocked at myself. I'm getting chills even just thinking about this book again, and I can't wait to go and pick up Iron Flame. I just really hope that Iron Flame lives up to the same hype as Fourth Wing. So the book follows Violet Sorrengail, who ends up going to Basgiath War College. This college has a few different quadrants, one of which she should have entered into, which is the scribe quadrant, but because of her family lineage and her mother and her brother, she ends up in the writer's quadrant, which involves dragons and all of that fun stuff. This one was just such a fun ride. It gives like fantasy and dystopian mix, which is really interesting. You go throughout this process with Violet going into the writer's quadrant and trying to figure out some things that are going on in the college and also the war that is happening outside of the college that they're currently training for. You learn some about her family members, and there is also a little bit of romance in here as well. I also love the dragons in this book too. They play a really, really amazing part. And I think the dragon side of things is what really made me fall in love with this book, which is, it sounds really cheesy, but if you've read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just the bond and relationship that the characters gain with their dragons is so good. So good. The twist at the end of this had me shook. That's all I'm gonna say. Also, the amount of times that mage lights were brought up. why was that said so many times in this book? Like, Rebecca was on the mage lights. She loved to throw that in anytime that she could. Walking down the path under the mage lights, going down the hall and the mage lights flickering, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh my God, there are mage lights all over campus. We get it. In total, I gave this book also a 4.5 stars. Loved it. Would so recommend. Will be finishing this series. Finally, we checked it off. Big accomplishment. Huge accomplishment, actually. Next up, we have The Last Word by Taylor Adams. Ooh. If I could do a silent review, this was not my cup of tea, which really shocks me because I also have read No Exit by Taylor Adams, and I enjoyed that book a good amount. I don't remember what I rated that book. It was probably like somewhere in the 3 to 3.5 stars range. Pretty fast paced. I kept up with it, didn't guess what was going on. It was a good book, good thriller. This book, however, the concept was just so weird. It wasn't even like the creep factor for me. It was just like the concept of, I don't know, everything just weirded me out. I can see where people rate this book very, very highly because it is so just odd and different from other thrillers. You have to read it to know. I can't really explain because I don't want to give anything away. I'll kind of tell you, I'll break down what it's about. So I don't even remember the main character's name, to be honest. You follow this woman who has just recently moved into a very remote area close to the beach. She's kind of going through it. I mean, not kind of, she's like really going through it. She's not in the best place. She does have a golden retriever. I will say the golden retriever was my favorite character in the whole book. She has a really odd neighbor who she has never actually spoken to. My blinds just broke a little bit, so that's fun and cool. She has a very odd neighbor she's never spoken to before in person and has only communicated with him via a... Are you kidding me right now? Y'all, my blinds have broken and they're about to come tumbling down probably. But I'm just gonna let it run its course until it decides it wants to fall because I need to finish this video. I'm busy. So she's only communicated with this neighbor via a whiteboard through the window. Like, why have you not just gone and spoken directly to each other? Especially if you live in a very remote area. I don't know. You do find some things out that happened in her past and the reason why she's there. Just very weird concept that I could not get behind, and I don't know how else to explain this book any further. It just was not for me. That's okay. So I did end up rating it at 2 stars. I apologize. I didn't give it a 1 because I did finish the entire thing. You know what? Let's be real. The only reason that I did fully finish it was because we read it for a book club that I'm in. So I did want to talk about it and talk about how odd it was. And everyone in my book club agreed. After this one, I'm like, okay, well now I'm 50-50 on Taylor Adams thing. Even No Exit sort of gave a similar feeling with the just like odd, creepy characters. I just had no attachment whatsoever to the main character. That's really what did it for me, is I have to have some sort of an attachment to a character in a book or I'm probably not going to enjoy it very much. Nashs Ashes by Sarah Adler. Wow. The lighting is getting horrible because these blinds have decided to break on me. What the heck do I do? I don't even know what to do about that. I guess I'll just scoot a little bit closer so it doesn't like shine on me really awkwardly. Nashs Ashes. I ate this book up. 4 plus 4? Say it. Say it. 8. This was such a good book, y'all. The fact that this is Sarah Adler's, what do you call it? Debut novel is actually shocking. I just loved it so much. I don't think I've ever cackled so much in a book before until reading this book. Maybe I would say This is the closest that I've gotten anything even remotely close to Abby Jimenez, giving me all the laughs and just like the good, fun feeling when reading a book. I absolutely flew through it. It says on the back, it says 2 love stories decades apart, 1 chance to prove love is worth the ride. You follow Millicent, who at one point moved in with a very elderly lady. She ends up being roommates with, obviously, and she gets very, very close to her, Mrs. Nash. They get very, very close. Miss Nash becomes her best friend. Mrs. Nash ends up passing away, and Millicent decides that she's gonna go on this journey to try to reunite Mrs. Nash with her one true love of her life. So you're following Millicent on this journey, trying to get Mrs. Nash's ashes to her one true love. But along the way, and very, very beginning of the book, you stumble across Hollis, who is definitely the grump of this book. He is also headed to the same area as Millicent. Lo and behold, they end up running into some issues at the airport, and they are on their way together to said area. You follow them both on this journey to their destination together and all of the hiccups along the road. It is so much fun, and the humor in this book is so good. Okay, I'm looking down at my page here that has my notes for the star ratings of each book, and I gave this book a 4.5 stars. The humor in this book is what did it for me, as well as a lot of the lines in this book. I highlighted a few because I just cracked up so much, and I also just loved so many of these lines. Okay, very first thing that I highlighted says, "I can tell that he smells really good. Comforting. Like the scent version of reading your favorite book in a worn leather chair with a cup of Earl Grey tea while rain patters against the window pane. He's not very nice, and yet he's so kind." When I read it out loud, it sounds so cringy and stupid, but like I'm telling you right now, it's so, so good. When I tell you I highlighted and underlined so much of this book, especially near the end, I went crazy with the pen. If there's one book that I talk about in this video, honestly, I'm gonna tell you that you need to read Mrs. Nash's Ashes if you want a good romance. That's all I'm gonna say. Read the book. It's so much fun. It's such a fun read. Please let me know if you have read this book, because I want to know your thoughts, your feelings, what you laughed at. I need to know it all. I need someone to talk about this book with. I straight up, you guys, I think I'm gonna go and change my rating of this book to a 5-star. Sarah Adler, if you ever watch this video, please give me another book. Please give me another book. I had to adjust where the camera is for lighting purposes because my blinds are being crazy. My camera isn't wanting to do anything properly for me today. Okay, I've got 2 books left. Next up, I read Butcher and Blackbird by Bryn Weaver. Y'all, this was a fun one. I have not read anything quite like this, but let me just break down what it's about first before I go into detail about my review. You're following Sloane and Rowan, who are both killers, serial killers, to other serial killers. You find out some things that happen in their past that have led them to this point in their lives where they feel as though they need to go and get rid of other serial killers that have very bad intentions. But along the way, they end up meeting each other and they start this challenge with each other, which is, let me just say, it's a ride. I will say though, number 1, check the trigger warnings, and number 2, check the spice. That's all I'm saying. If you're a young reader, I would not recommend this book, but it is really fun to listen to. I went back and forth from physically reading it to listening to it, and listening to it is really fun because Rowan has an Irish accent. I mean, is there more that I need to say? I loved both of these characters. I fully attached to both of them. It is a dual POV, so you get Sloane and Rowan's points of view, which I loved. It was very fast paced. The chapters are pretty short for the most part. I will be reading Leather and Lark as well. I want to say that's the second book, or am I wrong? Are there 3 and I'm getting that wrong? I do not remember. I want to say Leather and Lark is next, but another thing that I absolutely loved was the fact that there is a playlist that goes along with each chapter in the book, which is so cool. Really sets the tone for the chapter, really sets the mood. Incredible. A playlist in a book is just absolutely chef's kiss. So there is also a bonus chapter at the end of this physical book that I got, which was quite a time. I loved the bonus chapter. I ended up giving this book a 3.75 stars. I would recommend if you are okay with reading spice, also okay with the trigger warnings at the beginning of the book. But if you need a really fun thriller, like a romance thriller, not even really like crazy thriller vibes, but like just check the trigger warnings. This one is great. Love. And then the last book that I read for the month of August is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Holy cow. Honestly wasn't even really on my radar up until we pulled it for one of the book clubs that I'm in. I don't know if there was maybe someone that kind of made me steer sort of away from picking up this book that maybe I'd watched on like BookTok or BookTube or something like that. Maybe that's why I was pushing away from it for so long, because of maybe a review that I had watched. I'm really, really glad that we ended up pulling this for one of my book clubs because I loved it. I had to adjust because the lighting is going crazy currently. But yes, so One Dark Window, you are following Elspeth Spindle, who is just trying to survive really in this town called Blunder. It's this magical town that is locked by mist, the mist, which is like a magical, not great thing to have around the town. Basically, if you go into the mist, you get lost, bad things happen. It's not great. And it's spreading all over the surrounding area. Something happens to her when she is younger that has affected her entire life. She ends up stumbling across this highwayman, which ends up making her life kind of take a big drastic turn. There's a lot of dark magic going on in this book. There are these things called Providence cards that make things very, very interesting. I will say the magical element of this book really reminded me a lot of the feel that I got from Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. For some reason, I wouldn't say that the books are very similar, but that magical undertone of the books felt kind of the same. So I loved it. I 100% will be reading Two Twisted Crowns, which is the second book in this duology. It's definitely more of just like a magical fantasy than it is like a dragons and fae and very high stakes type of fantasy. It's more so just that magical element there that makes it a fantasy. It's set in a kingdom. It's got that really like old history type of feel to it. And there is a little bit of romance in it as well. I was really into the Providence cards. I wish I could say more about the Providence cards, but I don't want to spoil anything. So I ended up giving this book a 4.5 stars. Need I say more? It was incredible. Would highly recommend if you want to get into fantasy, but you don't want to necessarily read about fae and dragons and magic with the elements and that kind of thing. I would start with this one. I think Rachel Gillig is a phenomenal writer. So, and that is the last book that I read for August. Those are the 7 books that I read for the month of August. I think I had a fantastic reading month. Please let me know if you read any of these books. Thank you so much for being here watching this video. I appreciate you guys so much for being here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all the YouTube things. I would love to have you here on my channel as we talk all things bookish, life, coffee, cozy, you know, all the things, all the good vibes. But for now, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.